Hey guys, this is Yoda. So recently Blizzard decided to drop some patch notes on us earlier today. So obviously we're going to have to update the tier list. We'll go over the patch notes first. BM Hunter got a tier set nerf, but all damage buff. From what I'm told, this is on average between 4.5 to 6% damage increase once you have your 4-piece. So BM Hunter is definitely looking better than before. Unholy DK is randomly getting buffed, which is pretty good. Havoc is getting a pretty big nerf. I think it's 3 to 3.5%, depending on target count, according to some theory crafting. Havoc, I think, was actually positioned as probably actually the best melee in the game, and now I think it's going to be closer to other things. Your overall DPS may not be the highest, but the damage profile is still the best, I think, of all the DPS in the game, not just melees. Feral, this is a nerf to Moonkin weaving, or Owl weaving. Surely this is a good thing. Even Ferals, I think, will be happy with this. I think you still bear weave before Tiger's Fury, but yeah. Devastation, small AoE buff. Honestly, haven't seen a Devastation player play, so it's hard to gauge how strong this is. Beam Hunter was covered up here. Mistweaver healing nerf. So this is, I think, a little bit more than 4% total healing nerf since their insurance got nerfed. If we'll have to see whether or not Mistweaver can actually handle healing the keys. If you can still heal the keys, it doesn't matter. Recently, I've been playing with Mistweaver, who has been doing ridiculous single target damage. I've been seeing like upwards of 1 million DPS on single target, which is ridiculously high. If you can actually heal the keys as Mistweaver, that's going to be very valuable damage-wise. Also, you have Mystic Touch, which is a little bit less valuable. Disc Priest, I think these changes do not affect Mythic Plus, because I think you're playing Void Weaver in keys, and you don't have to worry about having 2 atonements either. Acid Rogue buffed, Sub Rogue nerfed. I think in the last tier list, I actually underrated Sub Rogue, but since it got nerfed, you know, we're placement is gonna change. Acid Rogue probably also will not change unless someone proves me wrong. Ellie, from what I understand, is a small nerf. People are unsure what this actually entails, and the rest is break even, from what I'm told. Enhance, I believe, is roughly 3-ish% nerf, but no one is really sure what the exact number is. For Enhancement Shaman in particular, I would say the bar is pretty high tuning-wise, since they're a melee DPS. Melee DPS have, you know, there's pretty strict requirements since you usually only want one of those in your key. And their utility is not super useful. Obviously, they have Shaman buff, and the AoE stops are good, but like Curse Dispel, Poison Cleansing Totem, Tremor Totem, which were massive hits in Season 1, are not that useful in Season 2. So I'd say the bar for Enhanced Shaman is a little bit higher than usual, which means tuning has a pretty big impact for them. Demolock, from what I understand, this is a small single target buff, but a massive AoE nerf. I'm not actually sure about the single target buff part, but it is a massive AoE nerf. So Demonology Warlock will be moving down the tier list. Destro Warlock, I don't fully understand, but I know that it is a very big single target buff and a smaller AoE nerf. We'll have to see how that actually plays out in Mythic Plus. I don't see a reason to change it on the tier list until we see, some more evidence. Once this changes gets pushed to PTR. Arms gets a small single target nerf, mostly an execute nerf, which will impact the raid, I think, more than keys. If you're an Arms Warrior player, this is actually probably the best you could hope for, because I think multiple copies of Arms Warrior were going to be played in the raid if this didn't happen. Like, many copies. Alright, that is a summary of the patch notes. Now we'll go on to the actual tier list. So, a few changes here. The S tier is pretty much still the same. I see VDH, Prot Paladin, or Prot Paladin being the best tank. VDH is definitely tankier. Prot Paladin is basically only played if your tank is not having trouble surviving it when you play Prot Paladin, or if your group needs the utility to survive. And Fire Mage still stands out as the best DPS since it just has everything in the game. You know, really good damage, raid buff, mass barrier, double kick, cheat death. If you think you need that in Mythic Plus, Mage already has it, so we're keeping them in S. A lot of specs making up the A+ tier. We'll go over the range first. So Disc Priest, not much has changed. We're keeping him in A+. In my opinion, Disc Priest is still the best healer generically for most comps. The biggest thing is that they can heal the tank for free. So even if you play with a Prot Paladin or like a DH who needs healing or a warrior or something, you should be able to keep them up without struggling too much just with Atonement. If you can't keep them up to Atonement, then it's the tank's fault, honestly. Also, the fact that they're able to meet most heal checks still, while providing Lenience, Power Word Shield, and Power Word Fortitude, enabling you to survive at key level higher, has not changed. So I'm still putting Disc Priest a tier above the other healers. Moonkin, after seeing some more Moonkins play, is actually quite a good DPS. I think the single target being low was product of some sandbagging. Moonkin is probably really good as a, it benefits from Arcane Intellect and mages in every comp, benefits from Chaos Brand, DHs in every comp, and it also brings Mark of the Wild, so we're putting them in A+. Also does really good AoE damage. For the Warlocks, I think Af probably does better priority damage now in AoE. Maybe Destro does better single target, but I'm not a Warlock player. I don't really know. The Warlocks I have been playing with have been doing really good damage, especially when they get power infusion. So we're going to leave them in A+. Gateway is also randomly pretty good, and so is Curse of Tongues in the new season. BM Hunter recently got buffed. I would say BM Hunter is an all-star in lower keys or like unorganized groups where you may not have the proper raid buffs to make like all the caster metas work. For instance, if you play with Mistweaver or Warrior, BM Hunter's thonks suddenly go through the roof, or if you can somehow cop a power infusion. It's also relatively easy to play BM Hunter, and Hunter utility is actually very good this season. Binding Vortex has a lot of uses, as does Feign Death randomly, and survivability-wise, BM Hunter is still in a really good spot, as it has been for a while. Ellie Shaman still doing really good damage, I think, even after the nerf, and brings a Shaman buff. Does have some trouble surviving, I would say. It's its biggest weakness. So I would say if you're playing an Ellie Shaman, you probably need a Paladin of some sort in the group, unless your healer is really good at the game. Shadow Priest is really good from some evidence we've seen. Does really good AoE damage. I think it might struggle in lower keys. Seems to benefit the higher the keys go, as Shadow always does. And you do still have Vampiric Embrace, which is basically the only strong like group healing from damage ability now that AG's gone that is still left in the game. Basically, if you push VE on a big pull, no one can die in the entire VE window, which is very powerful in the new season. Unholy Decay we have moved to A+. Previously, when I rated it, I had not seen Sand Lane Unholy Decay that much. I'd only really rated it based on Rider. Sand Lane seems to be very strong in Mythic Plus, and if you care about the first pull of the dungeon, then Sand Lane Unholy Decay is probably the best DPS for the first pull of the dungeon with Lust and Pot compared to every other DPS in the game. I would say it's probably doesn't belong in the S tier because, as you know, DK does not bring a raid buff, and just the first pull of the dungeon is, not that important. It's not as important as the rest of the key, I would say. I would say it's still important, but obviously the rest of the key is also important. Sorry. Put Unholy Decay so we put Unholy Decay in the A+ tier. Feral Druid is looking pretty good in the next season. The main things Feral Druid suffers from are the raid buff meta, as we already mentioned. If DH and Mage are in every key, well, Feral Druid doesn't benefit from any of that, so you're just minus 6% compared to the rest of your group. If you do somehow figure out a physical comp, Feral Druid would be very good for that. They do really good uncapped AoE, they have good priority damage, they have good survivability. Everything about them is good except the fact that they do physical damage and are in melee. Ret Paladin recently has been showing up in a few streams on the PTR. Their uncapped AoE seems quite good, and their survivability seems really good, and they are also one of the only melee specs that features good group utility. I would say DK also has good group utility, and Havoc DH is okay. As you notice, those three are in the A+ tier. In particular, Disc Priest seems like it does really well with group healing, but it suffers a bit in spot healing checks. For instance, if the boss puts out 2 debuffs or someone is getting shot a lot or something, it can be hard for Disc Priest to keep that person up. Red Paladin is really good at helping with that. Also, this Blessing of Freedom is randomly useful in a lot of situations. So we're leaving Ret in A+. I think if you are playing Disc Priest and not Prot Paladin, then Red Paladin stonks go through the roof. They're very good to put in a comp like that. Havoc DH did get a nerf, so I think their overall DPS is probably going to be lower than you would like if you care about the details meter. But in terms of timing the key, Havoc still has the best damage profile in the game. They still are going to do the highest damage to priority targets outside of maybe Aflock in certain like Lust PI pulls. They still have very consistent damage with like their quote-unquote cooldown being I-Beam on a 20-second cooldown, plus Reaver's Glaive being like kind of flexible when you can use it. So I would still put Havoc in the A+ tier, although you're not going to be like doing the best priority damage and topping overall. You're only going to be doing the best priority damage while having really good self-healing. All right, in the A tier, Blood Decay still seems like it can survive all of the keys so far with proper play, but they are missing a raid buff and they're not doing like obnoxious damage or anything, so I'm going to leave them in the A tier since there's no raid buff. In terms of comps, I would say any comp that has a VDH or a Prot Paladin, you could substitute a Blood Decay in for. You just would be missing like Chaos Brand, or it wouldn't be as good as Prot Paladin for keeping your group alive. Colossus Prot Warrior has been showing up a lot. We're gonna put it in the A tier. I think I underrated it last time based on the damage it's putting out. You do still require a healer in a lot of situations. You're unable to heal yourself, so things like bleeds or like AoE damage where the whole group is ticking down. You are able to mitigate some of it, but you do still need a healer to help you out. Especially compared to like Blood Decay or especially Vengeance Demon Hunter, actually. Prot Warrior just seems like a Vengeance Demon Hunter that does like similar damage and needs healing. So Mistweaver, I think it does extremely good single target, as we mentioned before. Really good overall damage in the key. The question remains, however, if they can actually heal all of the keys. Also, one thing about Mistweaver is that it is a melee and it buffs melee. This is one of the main problems actually with melee in the game right now. So all of the things that buff melee are warrior and monk, and those are both melee classes. However, a lot of the dungeons in Mythic Plus have mechanics where if you have more than one melee DPS or more than one melee non-tank in the group, then it gets really punishing. For instance, Blazicon and Darkflame Cleft. If you only have one melee in the group, then it will never pick the melee with a mechanic that forces you to run out. But if you have multiple melee, then the melee have to start outside, otherwise they get hit by something that has no travel time in melee. So multiple melees in the group are going to make the key way harder. And Mistweaver and Warrior are buffing other melees. So if you play a Mistweaver, you're already you're trying to form a comp that's going to be harder to play, which is the main problem I see with Mistweaver. So there's that. Resto Druid is looking very strong. We did play with some Resto Druids recently. The biggest problem with Resto Druids, from what I could tell, is that if you have to heal the tank, your group healing really suffers. Like, actually really hard to keep the tank up with just passive or easy healing. So we're going to leave it in the A tier. I think in terms of group healing, however, Resto Druids seem to be able to make all the checks that Dispriest was able to make. And they also, the other thing is though that they miss Lenience and Power Word Shields, so you can't really help your group that much with survivability. You're just basically able to keep them up. Damage-wise, it also seemed fine, especially on single target. Frost Mage we're leaving in the A tier as well. I think once you get to high keys, Fire Mage is probably going to do a lot more damage. However, in low keys, Frost Mage may be better depending on the mage player / the pull / everything else. We'll leave it in the A tier. Armor's Warrior did eat a pretty sizable single target nerf. We are going to leave it in the A tier for now. Subrogue and Acirogue we're also leaving in the A tier. A lot of people have been seeing Subrogue do massive damage. I would say the bar, however, for Rogue needs to be extremely high. You basically need to be topping overall to be considered like a really good spec. The main thing is, obviously, as we mentioned before, having multiple melee in your group seems to be a decent problem. And the bar for melees is very high. Rogue offers absolutely no raid buff, except, I guess, a Trophic Poison, and you also offer no group utility other than like Shroud, which, is often not needed in most groups. We're leaving Rogue in the A tier. Enhanced Shaman, we have moved it down also to the A tier. As we mentioned, the bar for melee is extremely high. Almost every melee in the A+ tier has group utility, for instance, DK with AMZ, Rat with Sack, Lay on Hands, etc. And DH with Darkness. Enhanced Shaman is like okay survivability wise, but it has none of that group utility. So for Enhanced to be considered meta, it needs to be doing a lot of damage. And right now, Enhanced after the nerf is doing like okay damage, but I wouldn't say it's like, overpowering enough to make up for the things that they lack. At least for the S tier classes, it's still good, so we're putting it in A tier. Frost Decay, we basically cut. I had it in A+ before, but if you'll notice if I moved to A+, it kind of makes the tier list awkward, so I had to move one DK down. People seem to care more about the first pull of the dungeon than other pulls, so I put Unholy in A+ instead of Frost, but honestly, they're both probably going to be fine in Mythic Plus. You do bring a raid buff. You do bring group utility, but no raid buff, which is the main weakness of Frost Decay. I would say Frost Decay is perfectly fine to play. Windwalker, kind of the same thing. You have a raid buff, but unfortunately your raid buff is Mystic Touch, and that's kind of useless for most of the specs. We're leaving it in A. Also, target cap is really bad for Windwalker, the first pull of the dungeon. If you care about the first pull of the dungeon, I recommend Windwalker, not playing Windwalker, because a lot of keys are gonna do like a massive uncapped pull at the start of the key. Windwalker is not going to do well on that pull. In B+, we have bear damage. It was looking a little bit better than before, but I think it's still the lowest of all the tanks, unfortunately. And you're also missing a little bit of group utility, I would say, compared to the rest. Like, even Warrior has Rally, Blood Decay has AMZ, Paladin has, you know, all the things Paladin has, and BDH has Darkness. So we're gonna leave Bear in B+ for now. We did get the chance to play with an MM Hunter. The overall actually seemed okay on target capped dungeons. However, the priority damage seemed very bad, and there's just no reason to play MM Hunter when BM Hunter exists, in my opinion. Beamalock, we already mentioned, I think got a massive AoE hit, so we moved it to the B+ tier. I am not quite sure exactly what the nerf it fully entailed, so it's possible it could be B+, or even A. Don't really know. In the B tier, nothing has really changed. It's possible that Fury Warrior could be B+. It's possible that Fury Warrior is underrated, but I don't really know where it belongs. Nothing has really changed for the rest of the healers. And we have moved Og to the Dej tier. From all the evidence that we've seen, Og is just officially dead in Mythic Plus. There's no reason to play Og unless you literally can't play anything else. And that'll be it for the tier list update. Thank you all for watching, and of course, be sure to stay tuned on the stream. Also, one last reminder, left to right does not matter on this tier list, and also the meta doesn't really matter. What we were saying on stream is that we did make a couple comps, a couple potential viable comps. Actually, we'll show them now. So there's like, this was a potential viable comp, VDH, Resto Druid, Fire Mage. This was a potential viable comp if you can actually live, and then there was another comp with Paladin, which I guess we'll show. Kind of did the outro, but we're still going to show the comp. So there was Paladin, Havoc, Disc Priest, and Moonkin. This was another viable comp that we were talking about. But the thing is, right, early on in the season, before the 0.5 patch, almost no one is going to be full BIS. So you're basically going to be bringing people that are more geared rather than people that are playing the correct comp. Either more geared or like better at the game or whatever it is. You're not going to be worried about your exact comp because the key levels simply aren't going to be hitting their maximum. You only need to worry about the key levels hitting their maximum. Like, you only need to worry about your comp when the key levels are starting to hit their maximum. And by the time they're hitting their maximum, you're going to be fully geared, which is going to be in 0.5. By 0.5, massive balance changes were probably going to occur, which are going to shake everything up. So I wouldn't worry too much about the quote-unquote meta right now. Just pick something that is like somewhat good and that you enjoy playing and figure out a way to make it work. All right, that's actually it for the video. Thank you all for watching. Peace out.